Today's scripture is Genesis 11, 1 through 9. All people on the earth had one language and the same words. When they traveled east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them hard." They used bricks for stones and asphalt for mortar. They said, "Come, let's build for ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky, and let's make a name for ourselves so that we won't be dispersed over all the earth." Then the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the humans built. And the Lord said, "There is now one people and they will have one language." That is what they have begun to do, and now all that they plan to do will be possible for them. Come, let's go down and mix up their language there so they won't understand each other's language. Then the Lord dispersed them from there over all of the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore it is named Babel, because there the Lord mixed up the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over all the earth.
I want it. I need it. We want it. We need it. Got to have it. Part of our human condition is to look around us and to see things that we are without. Sometimes we can become drowned with an inability to possess material things. Money, home, clothes, cars. Other times, for sure, the focus of being without is more tuned in to being without a companion, or a job that we like, or a sense of worth. If we're not really careful, our lives become shadowed by what we don't have. And thus we begin scrambling to fix it ourselves so that we can gain status or cement our place in the world. I remember very well attending annual retreats with my former church. We always went in January to the Cathedral Domain right outside Irvine, Kentucky. I always enjoyed those retreats, and I hope that in the not too distant future we might offer that time together. But I recall one year in particular. The focus was on affluenza. Not influenza, that dreaded bug that we try to escape every year, but affluenza. That illness that attempts to bring us down day in and day out. This retreat was being led by an incredible laywoman of faith, Ann Eames. She and her husband have now retired and moved to Oregon. And at the time of this retreat, they were sort of in that pre-mode of moving to Oregon. They're going to stay in Lexington for a bit. So they were in the process of downsizing. The process didn't involve simply moving to a smaller home, although it did involve that. But more importantly, it required them to take a look at what was really important in life, what was worth hanging on to, and what needed to be let go. Now, I wasn't privy to Ann and Bill's personal financial statement, but by all appearances, I think they did okay, both with good full-time jobs and had a home and traveled. But I didn't need a financial statement review to understand what was important to them. They were a couple who gave back to their community in any number of ways. At the church, Ann was always volunteering to help with kids' programming or lead retreats or work in the kitchen. She just had an amazing heart for serving God and for serving others. Those in need, those especially without a voice, donating their time to issues like what do we do to our environment. And really, in truth, to be honest with you, Ann and I were never close friends. But as my church family member, I had great respect for Ann. And she inspired me and still does. So at this retreat, we discussed this philosophy of how we get affluenza, that need to have more. We talked about, for example, the staggering money that people spend on storage units. And that a significant percentage of that money is not spent for folks who are in transitional housing, but indeed, it's spent for extra storage space. And as we had that discussion, we were invited to take an inventory of our own homes, be they houses or apartments. But to envision and then to go home and do it physically, to take a look at our closets and our drawers, on our shelves, in our pantries, and if we had them, our garages. And the question posed to us was fairly simple. Looking in all these places, how much stuff do we have? And of that stuff, how much of it is really necessary? And of that stuff, how much of it could we give to others? Perhaps those size 10 clothes I've been holding on to for about 20 years. That ship has indeed sailed. But seriously, looking at our stuff, and as I say that to you, I'm convicted because truly I have that at home, so I've got a little something to do this afternoon. But what a starting point it would be for us to start there, looking at our stuff and what we don't really need, which would be a win-win. It would be the first dose of medicine for our affluenza, and share with those who do not have. I got to be honest with you, friends, I got more nervous as that retreat went on. I am a sentimental pack rat. I don't throw much away. I mean, I'm the person that has a favorite sweater and I never wear it, waiting for the right occasion. I'd like to say I don't throw things away because I'm as frugal as my mom, but that's not the case either. And I can tell you, my mom doesn't throw anything away. She is frugal, and that's a nice way for me to say it. But the truth is, I'm just so darn sentimental. And really, all jokes aside, that's an issue that I need to continue reeling in. For my feelings of sentimental could easily be mistaken as greed. I lose sight amidst all of the stuff of what's really important. I mean, really, here we are living in a 4-bedroom house with 2 adults and 2 dogs. And literally, I'm sort of ashamed to admit to you, but it's the truth. Literally, every closet and most drawers are full, as is the workshop storage, as is the garage except for where we park our cars. And I joke with much truth that when we moved in together, Brenda supported a complete remodel of our house just to get rid of my stuff. Once it went out, very little of it came back in. I'm telling you, friends, if we're not careful, we'll become smothered by stuff. Is it just me this morning? Or does my recurring condition of affluenza affect anyone else? It seems we're made like that. Made to want more, made to want to hold on to things, to look around us and determine what we don't have and work to get it, or to look around what we already have and say, well, I might need that. If you argue we aren't made like that, well, just look at how media manipulates us. Billions of dollars spent on commercials. Strategic placement of items in a store, because research confirms to us that we will act and buy even when we don't need it. I remember as a college student, I worked at Begley Drugs. Does anybody remember that drug chain? Lexington Mall, and there was a movie theater at the time there, and I was a cashier. One of my fond memories was having to work there on an Easter Sunday and walking in after all the Easter candy and baskets were gone. And my mom had left and called the pharmacist and said, "My baby won't be home Easter and has to work. Will you put aside an Easter basket?" So as I clocked in, there was an Easter basket there. At the same time, I'm working there at Begley Drug, I worked at the cashier station right at the entrance of the mall. And I remember getting my first lesson in retail and how strategic placement really does persuade folks. I was in charge of stocking up all the candy and facing and straightening, and still it bothers me to go in the store when things aren't faced and straightened. But I also remember one of my jobs, especially on the weekends, the busy weekends of movies, was to fill up the candy table right in front of the register. And the sign that we put on that candy table was 3 for $1. And let me tell you, people wore it out. They'd come in there before going to the movie, man, what a deal. And they would throw those candy bars in. Well, the truth is they were 30 cents each. Wait for it. Billions of dollars spent persuading us, because research will confirm that we'll buy even when we don't need. Political strategists are paid high dollars to craft campaigns because they know that if they push the "I need it" button or "they got it" button and I don't have, they'll get our vote. Affluenza, while not deadly to our physical bodies, I can tell you it is deadly to our spirits. Our scripture lesson today from Genesis, one of my favorite stories in the Bible. We see a world rebuilt after the flood. I think for me, this story of the flood was the first in which I began to question literal interpretation of the Bible. For as a young teenager, once I discovered how people procreate, and yeah, Mom, I got told that before you told me about it. But once I was aware of that, it occurred to me that if taken literally, Noah's sons and their wives would have to procreate by incest, because exiting the boat would be just sons and daughter-in-laws, a mom and dad, and then first cousins. It didn't seem right to me. That's a sermon for another day. Today's story follows the story of the flood, and as I interpret that story, it gives an account of what happens to people when they go their own way, do their own thing, and resist God's vision and purpose. So the flood story provides an opportunity for us to look at what happens when folks regroup and get a do-over. An opportunity to learn how vitally important to stay true to God's call and to accept the responsibility as a person of faith to be committed to God and each other. And when that doesn't happen, well, chaos occurs. I wish that one-time flood story had taken hold, but as we know, chaos continues, doesn't it? Let's read the verse right before Jason started this morning, backing up just one verse to chapter 10, verse 32. These are the families of Noah's sons according to their genealogies in their nations, and from these nations spread abroad the earth after the flood. So these brothers and their wives regenerate the earth, and then chapter 11 begins. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. That makes sense, doesn't it? Same parents, same religion, same culture. They were just one big homogeneous family. They looked alike, acted alike, they spoke alike, all was well. And that lasted one verse. For very quickly, their human condition took over. They weren't satisfied, which seems sort of odd to me. Does it you? You'd think getting out of that smelly boat with a bunch of animals would bring centuries of celebration. And they'd say, no matter what happens, we're out of the boat. But no. They wanted more. They wanted control. They wanted to be God-like. Well, no, really, they didn't want to be God-like. They wanted to be God. More. 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 I'll read in another translation. Then they said, come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower that reaches heaven. Let's make ourselves famous so we won't be scattered here and there across the earth. God came down and looked over the city and the tower those people had built. God took one look and said, one people, one language. This is only the first step. No telling what they'll come up with next. They'll stop at nothing. See, my friends, these folks had begun with a quest for more. More power, more prestige, more domination. And it created a culture of not enoughness. And as they acted on the not enoughness, they were sickened with an ancient form of affluenza. They bought into the same myth that we do, the myth of scarcity. They lived in scarcity. How many of us are overworked, overwhelmed, overstressed? About what? Our health? Now that one would make a lot of sense because we can't buy that, can we? Health is the great equalizer. As are issues of tragedy and natural disasters and the like. But I wonder if there are any of us this morning who are overworked or overwhelmed or overstressed because we're buying into the not enoughness. And how does that spill over into our responsibilities at our church home? We don't have enough time to volunteer at the church because we're busy. Is that really true? Busy with what? What's more important than sharing God's love? We don't have energy to help out because we're too tired or we're just too down in the dumps to be around people. I want to tell you, one of the greatest ways to become energized is to work on something that makes a difference in the lives of others. We don't have enough resources, so we can't possibly give regularly to church. Now listen, don't check out on me here. I'm not going to apologize for shedding light on the fact that faithful living includes making the church some of our financial sacrifice. I'm also not going to portray that if you give generously, you're going to be more blessed than the next person. Or that if you put a larger check in the offering plate, that God's going to heal a physical ailment of you or a loved one. Because frankly, I don't believe that. I don't subscribe to a prosperity gospel. You know why? Because look around, it doesn't hold water. And I know that talking about money makes some people uncomfortable. And I know it's been used in two ways, at least. It's been used by the church to guilt people into giving. And let's be honest, it's been used by people to make excuses for not going to church. All that church talks about is money. I ain't going. But let's be realistic. If working together, which includes our time, our talents, our commitment to be involved, and our resources, if we're not willing to share these with our church, when we claim that the church is important to our personal spiritual growth and to society in general, then my friends, we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. For the reality is that having a church presence requires commitment and sacrifice. I'm going to back up and say that again. The reality is that having a church presence requires commitment and sacrifice. And maybe when we recognize we have an abundance of time, of talent, of energy, and some of us of resources, instead of buying into the not enoughness, we'll find meaningful ways to contribute so that we can sustain the church, so that we can sustain our spiritual home. So more and most importantly, this church's witness of inclusiveness continues to grow. Now, how do we do that? For I recognize that the reality is we have different abilities. We can all make a joyful noise, but let's be honest, not everyone's cut out to be a soloist. We can all volunteer, but we know that the key is matching church needs with individual talents. I call it putting round pegs in round holes. If you have the perfect round peg, but you're cramming it into a square hole, it's not going to be good. And we know that some in our church have larger bank accounts than others, better paying jobs, less demands on their household budgets. So as we reflect on our stewardship, which we will be doing the next couple of weeks, may we be reminded of what I think is the most important lesson in this Genesis story. What disturbed God the most about these post-flood people was not that they desired more. Sure, that was an issue, but it wasn't the main one. God's primary issue with them was that they wanted to remain all alike. They did not want to be a diverse people, so they thought if they could dominate the language and the culture and the religion, since all of them were the same, that they'd be as powerful as God. But that wasn't God's desire. Responding to their determination to remain just alike in their thoughts and deeds, God said, "Watch this move. Let us go down and confuse their language." And God scattered them abroad. The moral of the story is this, at least in my interpretation. We're not expected to volunteer in the same way, to contribute energy or creativity in the same way, or to write the same number by the dollar sign on our check, for we're different, and we have different abilities. And God knows what they are. God doesn't want us to be the same. God created us uniquely for a purpose, and if we're all the same, my friends, there's way too many of us. God desires diversity, and then calls us to work very hard to understand one another and live with one another and appreciate each other for what we do and give. Not in spite of our diversity, but because of it. Did you all know that that was the original tagline of our church? I was so excited to be called to start a church, and I was going to be a real live pastor. Something many people told me would never happen because I would never be ordained. So I was excited in the months preceding our very first meeting, and in those months of preparation, I got online and I ordered some address labels because I'd been ordained and I could say Reverend Marsha. And I thought, I got to have a tagline, something catchy. So, on my original return address labels, before we were ever even named Bluegrass United Church of Christ, and I still have some of these, by the way, the tagline, the vision I had of our church's birthing was this: united in our diversity to love and serve in God's world. For I believe we're made like that too. May it be so. May it be so.